What's up? How you
All
doing?
right.
Can you
Hey,
hear me?
Eddie. Hey, Eddie. Hey, Eddie. All right. So, guys, I want to welcome everyone on Clubhouse to the War Room because this is our new show. This is recorded. Hi, Caroline.
Hello.
How are you?
Fine, thank you.
Good. So, my name is Chris Baldwin, aka Fight Goddess by day and DJ Tribal by night. And I host a show called Angry Afro Radio. You can follow me at Mixcloud and YouTube. I also run a mobile training service here in Los Angeles. I specialize in combat sports, conditioning, and performance coaching, and I manage unsigned fighters. I've been in the industry for over 30 years and over in the fight game for about 12 years or so. And I spent the first 2 years in boxing at spending those that time at Freddie Roach's place called Wildcard. So I know quite a bit about how dirty the boxing business is. I've seen it up close and personal. And today we're going to be speaking with my friend and fellow podcaster, Eddie Goldman. He is a seasoned sports writer, a commentator, and he will share with us his in depth knowledge of all things boxing. And he is what we call the conscious of combat sports. Welcome to the show, Eddie.
Thank you. When you say I'm seasoned, it means I'm old, which I guess both of them, both of them are true, right?
This is true, Eddie.
And hello, Clubhouse. When they get out of beta, when they get an Android or Windows version, then I'll probably be on it. But right now, I'm not on it.
That's okay,
But
Eddie. Everybody can follow you, though, on Twitter, Instagram,
yeah,
Facebook,
Twitter,
and Patreon.
NHB News. Yeah, the best ways are Twitter at NHB News. That's the one I use the most. Social media. My website's eddiegoldman.com, and my Patreon page, where we had a preview of the Burchell Valdez fight, unlike any other, by the way, is patreon.com/Eddie Goldman. So, and all these things are linked to each other. So, follow the stuff that's going on online.
Absolutely. Okay, so look, let's just jump right into last night's fight. Now, before we get started, I want to tell you, Eddie, I always fall asleep on these fights. But last night I fell asleep and I woke up just as Valdez was knocking Belcher out, and I like sat straight up in the bed. So that shit woke me up, and it reminded me of Marquez knocking out Pacquiao because Belcher fell right down on the canvas, flat out, cold. So, what were your thoughts on that fight? Give us your rundown.
Yeah, I think Marquez and Pacquiao, when that happened, was a little more shocking because it wasn't as it turned out as one-sided a fight, because there were clear indications. I'm not even talking about before the fight, where a lot of us really suspected something like this was going to happen. But as the fight actually went on, it's one thing to make predictions and prognostications and all of that. Then when the bell rings and they're fighting, then you see what happens. But as this fight started, the first several rounds, it was all Valdez's fight. He was jabbing at a distance. He even got Burchell's nose bleeding in the second round. He was more aggressive. He was doing what he needed to do to break down Burchell, and he was moving better. He's always had better speed and better footwork. People were worried about the power, but Burchell looked old and plodding. I talked about it in the Patreon article. But this fight was supposed to go on a couple of times, but after the pandemic, they started during the pandemic, started rescheduling these fights in the bubble. So this one was going to be in December. In November, Burchell comes down with COVID-19. Now, he might have become negative after that, but this is a horrible disease that takes a lot out of you. And even an elite athlete, a world champion fighter like Burchell, it's going to have very likely some effects on you. And then there was the issue of Burchell making weight. He's been fighting at 130 for a while. His last fight, which was, there's some controversy, was whether it was an official fight or not, but he was fighting up at 135. It's harder for him to make 130 And it was clear during the weigh-ins that he looked gaunt. He raced right away, right after the weigh-ins to drink water and eat food and rehydrate and all of that. It was difficult for him making the weight. And Valdez is a little smaller, coming up from 126 a few fights ago. So it's actually healthier for him and better for him to fight at 130 because he'll retain his power and he won't have to dry himself out and wear himself out trying to make weight. So the first 3 rounds were pretty clearly Valdez, and in the 4th round, Valdez almost knocked him out with a left hook. There was a knockdown called after a barrage when Rochelle stumbled into the ropes. Some people said it shouldn't have been a knockdown, but it really looked like he was saved by the bell, even though he wasn't down when the bell rang. It looked like if that round had gone on just a few more seconds, it would have been over. In the 5th round, Valdez was still very patient because, you're not going to walk in with a guy like Rochelle, just throw a couple punches and knock him out. And he couldn't drop Rochelle, who was wobbly. And in the 6th and 7th, Rochelle, who of course is a warrior in his own right, recovered a little, and Valdez was making some mistakes. He was warned for rabbit punches. And in the 7th round, Rochelle early looked good, but in the late part of the round, Valdez rallied. And in the 8th round, there were a lot of exchanges. I also gave that to Valdez with his jabs. The 9th round, he was completely taking over the fight with left hooks and jabs, and he knocked down Rochelle this time without any controversy with a barrage and an uppercut. And a lot of people saying that Corner should have stopped the fight at that point. It was over, but other than Rochelle going down. And then finally in the 10th round, that highlight reel left hook from Valdez that knocked out Rochelle cold. And this is a kind of fight that, and some people have pointed this out, this is a kind of fight that ruins careers when you get knocked out like that. And again, on an elite, you're talking about an elite fighter like Rochelle. We're not talking about somebody that's a club fighter who just started fighting. And he's been in a lot of wars. Rochelle is known to stand toe for toe with fighters, throw punches, go through these all-out barrages, and usually emerging victorious. But you can defeat lesser fighters like that, but that will take its toll. So all these things added up to me ahead of time, where, and I was writing you and a couple of other people before the fight, saying this is going to be a victory for Valdez, either by late stoppage or decision. And if it were a decision, I was worried about, the Las Vegas decision.
Right.
But even then, I think the judges had Valdez well ahead at the time of the stoppage, had the knockout never come. I think that, a lot of reasonable people picked Rochelle ahead of time, but they didn't use logic. They didn't look what was going on building up to this fight. There were a lot of clues out there, a lot of signs out there that if you look carefully and you looked objectively with integrity, and you're not looking for what a promoter or a network wants, you're looking at who's going to win this fight as a sporting contest to the extent boxing is a sport. All the signs pointed to Valdez, and they pointed out on the telecast, even the late bettors, the late money was coming in on Valdez because people saw the weigh-in and they saw the condition of Rochelle. He looked really strained from this big weight loss. But this is something people should have seen ahead of time. And I saw like one website, they asked 20 big, quote, experts who would win. 18 of them picked Rochelle. Others, everybody picked Rochelle. And again, that was not like a crazy or corrupt pick, but it wasn't the most informed pick from people who really know. And again, I'm only in a limited way in the loop on this. I'm not out in Vegas and out on the West Coast and in Mexico, watching these guys train. I'm watching them on TV or online. I'm watching the weigh-ins and the press conference and the Zoom calls and all this type of stuff. And you can understand a lot of things that way if you have integrity and you use logic and reason and don't look at it as a fan or don't look at it, well, what is the promoter want? Because it was pretty clear from the build-up to this fight that the promoters and the networks were already comparing this to these great trilogies of other Mexican fighters such as Marco Antonio Pereira and Eric Morales and Rafael Marquez and Israel Vasquez. But I don't think there's going to be a rematch between these two. And I can understand why the networks and promoters want that. Those were great historic trilogies. And if people haven't seen them, I'd really recommend go online wherever, I don't know where they're up, YouTube or wherever, go up and watch those fights if you're a fight fan. Great, all those are great, great fights. And you're not going to have a trilogy out of this. So I think they expect it to be a very close fight and one of those knockdown, drag-out wars. And the signs were all there ahead of time. It wasn't going to be that way. And another thing I have to point out, I rarely make public predictions for fights. And there are a couple of reasons for that. First of all, I don't want to give gamblers unpaid assistance, and I don't gamble. I also am involved, as you know and alluded to, a lot of controversies about these sports. A lot of these websites don't want anybody that's going to have integrity and tell the truth and unmask the corruption when we find out about it in all of this. So I'm involved in a lot of stuff already. And who's going to win a fight is, again, people can be honest and reasonable and disagree on this. So that's not necessarily the kind of controversy I want to really focus on in the work that I'm doing. And some journalistic outlets don't even let their people who cover boxing make fight predictions. For example, the New York Times doesn't allow their writers to make at least public predictions. They want them to report and lay out what's happening and let people decide. So I'm more of that school. But privately, to a couple of people, like, we had a little, I think about 3 or 5 people in a little email chain. And you saw what I wrote on Friday.
Yeah, you predicted Valdez.
Yeah, I was leaning to Valdez, and then as time went on and I investigated it more, it became clear to me it was going to happen. And I've been right more, I'm not right, nobody's right 100%, certainly not me. But when you look at a lot of these clues, you make your predictions during the week of the fight, like I did on the rematch between Andy Ruiz and Anthony Joshua.
Right.
The first fight, I thought Joshua would blow him out. I was dead wrong on that. The second fight, though, their opinions were divided. So I got that one right. And the rematch of Tyson Fury and Deontay Wilder, Fury, who boasts a lot and says all kinds of wild things, was saying he's going to move forward and knock out Wilder. And people were saying, well, this is pre-fight hype and braggadocio and selling the
I
fight.
believed him when he said that.
Right, so did I, and I predicted that he was gonna stop Wilder. I just thought it would be a little later than he did, and of course, since then Wilder hasn't fought. He got in this crazy public dispute with his very well respected trainer Mark Breland,
Right.
who was an Olympic gold medalist and world champion, and accused him of all these conspiracy theory type stuff, like he was Donald Trump or something. And we haven't heard from Wilder since. We don't know what's going to happen with him. We also don't know when Fury's going to fight Joshua. Supposedly these negotiations have been going on, and for about 3 months we've been hearing every day from Eddie Hearn, oh, it's going to be settled in a week or two. And now we're at the end of February and it's still not settled. It's likely it's going to happen because there's so much money involved, but Fury hasn't fought since then. And people also saw a video Fury put up of him doing one of these polar bear type swims where in the very cold weather he strips down to his bathing suit and he runs in the water. And they noticed a big, a big fire around his waist. He looked flabby. So he hasn't fought since then.
He hasn't fought, he hasn't trained, he hasn't worked out. Yeah.
Yeah, and if he hasn't, what has he been doing? He was supposed to fight Wilder at the end of last year, and Wilder kept postponing it, and then the whole thing fell apart. But my point going back to the predictions is no one's going to get them all right. I'm not going to get them all right.
Right.
But there's a way to look at these things ahead of time. And that's the kind of journalism, that's the kind of stuff that I do in a very respectful way when the fighters are respectful. So I wrote the article on Patreon where I didn't make the prediction, but I was set who I was going to see winning. Los Guerreros and Mexicanos, Michelle versus Valdez. It's up on my Patreon site. And, I started off talking about how the bookies had Michelle as a big favorite, all the problems that existed for Michelle coming into this, and the advantages that it looked like Valdez would have, particularly since he got Eddie Reynoso as his trainer, who trains Canelo Alvarez and Ryan Garcia, who's really just done an amazing job in improving Valdez's boxing ability. Because a lot of people will remember about 3 years ago, Valdez fought Scott Quigg. And Scott Quigg is a good fighter, but I would never see him like as an A-level fighter. And that fight turned out to be much more difficult for Valdez than most expected. What happened was during the fight, Quigg broke Valdez's jaw. He had to have it wired shut afterwards. It ended up being a real war, and a lot of people thought if Quigg had started earlier, he might have won that fight. So Valdez got rid of Manny Robles, who also had been Andy Ruiz Jr.'s trainer when he defeated Joshua. He got rid of him and hooked up with Eddie Reynoso and went back to more boxing, and also began to move up from 126 to 130. And Valdez was an Olympian representing Mexico. He can do both, but he was sort of sinking into that toe-to-toe style of a brawler almost. And he can do both, as he showed in this fight with Michelle. But he has to use all of his skills when he's fighting on this level. And Eddie Reynoso is able to help him develop and develop your fight IQ to know what to do when.
Right. When
to jab and move, when to really go in for the kill. You have to know that, and it takes a while to figure that out, especially when you're going up against somebody who is also a seasoned, a veteran fighter with a lot of experience. Michelle was not an Olympian, but he had a lot of amateur experience. He had a lot of professional fights. He was considered going into this fight by everybody the top 130-pound fighter in the world. So, yeah, he's thinking too, but he was much more limited. And that's the equation that you have to discuss and figure out for every fight. The speed versus power, footwork, ring IQ, the conditioning. You have to put all those factors together and then come up with a prediction. And anybody, when you have mismatches, because most of the fights they put on TV are planned mismatches, or showcase fights. So anybody can pick those. But there are certain fights like these over the years that you really have to examine ahead of time. And I have a pretty good track record picking Bernard Hopkins over Felix Tito Trinidad, picking Joe Calzaghe over Jeff Lacey, and what country they come from, doesn't matter to me.
Right. So
Well,
Eddie,
this
so
is
Eddie,
that particular.
let me ask you, what do you think? What's next for Valdez? Who do you think he's gonna match up next?
Well, probably another top-ranked fighter at 130. He was calling out Shakur Stevenson, who's a top-ranked
That would
fighter.
be a great
There are
fight.
other fighters too. That could be a really good fight. That might be the one that makes the most sense. But it's a question.
Make most sense and most
one.
money.
Yeah. Do they want to put young Stevenson, who's only 23 and undefeated, only 15 pro fights? Do they want to put him in with a guy like Valdez, a more experienced guy, right away?
Right.
So then you got to look too, and I haven't looked at this. The mandatories, who's his WBC? Mandatory, I don't really
Oh, okay.
know that. So I don't think we're going to see Burchell for a while. But I think when Burchell comes back, it'll be at least at 135. I think Valdez is going to stay at 130 for a while.
Okay.
And again, after a fight like this, they'll probably give him an easier fight. I could look up the WBC rankings, but those things changed when it's called, the promoters call it lobbying. They call up they call it the sanctions bodies, and they say, hey, you have my guy, he should be ranked higher, or she should be ranked higher, or whatever.
So I'm gonna. Does anyone in the room have a question? If you do, you can raise your hand. If you have a question for Eddie, Caroline, you want to ask Eddie anything?
I don't have a specific question, but I do agree with what he was saying. It's just that, yeah, for Burchell, I don't know what's next for him because we haven't heard. He suffered a really severe concussion yesterday, so I don't know what's going to happen afterwards. We haven't really heard. We know he left the hospital, but that's about it. So I think it's going to be tough for him to come back. I don't know. I met with Miguel, so I really wanted him to win yesterday. I know Miguel, but
yeah.
I still need to talk with Derek Harmon, who's working at Top Rank, to see if he knows about it. But yeah. But I was impressed. I have to say, I was impressed with Valdez and the game plan they had. Well, yeah, yesterday with against Burchell. But
yeah, it was a competitive fight. That's the type of fights we definitely want to see more of. So I'm hoping Team Burchett, I hope he pulls through and recovers quickly and gets back in the ring soon.
Yeah, I hope too. Right. Yeah, but
I'm looking at the WBC rankings, by the way, at 130, and they haven't updated them since this fight.
Right.
And so they had Burchell as champion, Valdez is number 1, and they had Stevenson as number 2.
Uh-oh, there you go.
But
there you go.
They could try to get a title unification fight with somebody like the WBO champion Jamel Herring, or the IBF champion Jojo Diaz, or the number 3 WBC fighter, Ochaki Foster, who holds whatever the silver belt, and there are other guys. So I don't know who he's going to fight straight away. I have a hunch that a fight with Valdez and Stevenson would want to build that up a little bit.
Oh, yeah. Maybe next year. Maybe next year.
Yeah, get some more wins. You know how it goes in boxing. Have them fight people. They won't necessarily. You usually don't have to fix fights these days in boxing because you make a mismatch and you know who
the winner's going to be.
And who's not supposed to win. It's once in a while there are upsets, and then when they get to the very top, like a fight like this with Burchell and Valdez, they just let them fight. But most of the time, people know who's going to win and who's supposed to win. So I think they'll do that with. My guess is, knowing Top Rank and knowing ESPN, they'll do that with Valdez and Stevenson in their next fights. Maybe they'll have them on the same card, fighting different people,
right? And
then have them get in the ring together. Do that whole WWE type shtick, which is utterly ridiculous. Because if you follow, by the way, the build-up to the Burchell Valdez fight, these guys were very respectful towards each other.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't the nonsense, these guys don't like each other, all the crap that's gone on for years. There's bad blood. As if professional boxing is about settling a personal beef or a personal score.
Right.
They want people to think that, and MMA is even worse than that because a lot more of the fans buy this. They don't like each other's stuff. In fact, they even had a card about 15 years ago. It's a major fight people remember with Floyd Mayweather and Zab Judah. And it was a pay-per-view, and I think they had both Don King and Bob Arum rarely working together. So you had all the hype and schmaltz, and they called the card Bad Blood. So I was at the press conference ahead of time, and I said, and the theme was, these guys don't like each other. It's nonsense. So I said to Floyd, do you dislike Zab? He said, no, I don't dislike him. He's okay, but I have a job to do. He's a boxer. He's a fighter. That's what we want to see. They want to fight. And I said the same thing to Zab Judah. No, I don't dislike him, but I'm going to fight him, which they ended up doing, because that's what their job is. If they were dancers or baseball players or tennis players or whatever, they do that. All that is irrelevant. But in boxing, they try and build up this silly, contrived drama about they don't like each other. I thought it was a great fight with Valdez and Burchell, and these guys are known to be pretty much friends. But you saw what happened in the ring. It was a great all-action fight.
It was. Well, Eddie, it has been wonderful chatting with you, talking up this fight, and we are going to hit it.
I got one more thing I got to add if we got time.
Okay, go ahead.
On a different topic.
Uh-oh.
This weekend is the 56th anniversary of the assassination of Malcolm X, the Black Shining Prince. And there are a number of films that have come out recently on commercial media that are depicting Malcolm X and other people from the Black Liberation Movement. And I would suggest people look at the critiques of them, because I remember a lot of that period. I'm old enough, being seasoned means I remember a lot of this stuff from the 60s. I would suggest people look at a lot of the critiques of these films, the lack of historical integrity. Yeah, they're historical fiction, but they change and distort things. Films like One Night in Miami and the one about Fred Hampton, Judas and the Black Messiah. I'd suggest people look at some of the critiques of these. You may find them entertaining or not. That's kind of, that's more out of my realm. I'm not a film reviewer.
Right.
And people could like it or not. I just give an example of an old film that I liked that was complete nonsense. Lady Sings the Blues. If you remember that film a while back with Diana Ross playing.
Right. Historically, it was not accurate.
Historically, it had almost no relation to reality.
Right.
But is an entertainment film.
Right, because it's one of my favorite Diana Ross films.
Yeah, I think it really is Diana Ross. But anyway, you're right. And one of the consultants in the film was one of the guys that got Billie Holiday hooked on drugs, and he ended up being a hero in the film, played by everybody's heartthrob Billy D. Williams. When he really could have been the villain if you were doing something historically accurate. That was more of an extreme example. So I'd suggest, look, if you're going to watch these films, look very critically, and what you'd be better off doing is reading Malcolm X's speeches, watching the videos, listening to the audio. They're on YouTube and all over. There's an enormous amount of this documented, and find out what he said, what he did, and how he said and did it, rather than looking at, what Amazon says or one of these, or Netflix says, or one of these other things about him. Look at the facts. Right. And you want to see entertainment? Fine. Look, I think there are better things that are entertaining anyway than that kind of stuff. But if you want to just know what you're getting into, you're not getting into anything that's worthwhile. In fact, it normalizes and it strips away what Malcolm really stood for and sanitizes him at a time where it's really important to understand what he said, what he was doing, and try to apply what is applicable. Not everything is applicable,
Right.
but what is applicable to our terrible conditions today.
Right. I agree, Eddie. I'm going to check that film out. That is all the time we have today. And thank you, Caroline, for joining us and all the other
Thank
Clubhouse members that popped in and popped out.
Thank you, Clubhouse. I'm looking forward to getting on.
You better go buy an iPad or something, Eddie, so you can join in.
I have to buy a new PC because the one I have now is crapping out. So.
Right. But that's it for us. Caroline, I'm going to end this room. You can hop on into somewhere else, and I'll see you guys next week.
Okay.
Take care.
All right. Ciao.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.